Hello and welcome to the program. I am Suren. Only recently I have been subjected to a constant bombardment of preaching activity by a Christian prayer group, constantly inviting me to share their sessions over the social media. But they have been doing so in the most inappropriate times when I was involved in broadcasting or producing a small film for social media presentations. That I was busy finding solutions for someone's small personal issues as well. It was not only annoying, but also very unusual and very extremely nerve-wracking. I had no choice but let them know that I was not interested in their activities, asking them to stop kindly sending me any more messages. Why did anyone need to behave this way? Why was there any necessity for them unannounced and sudden interference from their side? Truly annoying, as they were literally destroying the so ever delicately designed media presentations. If this is what they do to many others, and there may be many who are totally annoyed with them, can you guess how they may have reacted to these well-meaning people? And so, analyzing this unusual and sudden urge to preach religiously by some folk may stem from a variety of factors, often involving a combination of personal experience and a sense of urgency about sharing their faith. This urgency can be fueled by a profound conviction of one's beliefs, a desire to help others find salvation, or a feeling of having been called to share their message. I have seen this many times over with a printing company called Watchtower and Tract Society of Jehovah's Witnesses. Let me tell you a little of what I have discovered so far. Personal conversion or awakening. A religious awakening can be a transformative experience that leads individuals to feel a strong desire to share their newfound beliefs with others. This can happen after a period of reflection and crisis, leading to a sense of being elevated to a different plane of consciousness. Existential crises. Facing difficult life situations like a near-death experience or the loss of one's loved one can be a cause of a person's sense of the fragility of life and the importance of their faith, leading them to share their message with urgency. Sense of calling. Some individuals believe they have a divine call or purpose to preach and share their faith with others, feeling driven to fulfill this calling and desire to help. A strong desire to help others find salvation and overcome personal struggles can motivate individuals to share their faith and beliefs, or some amount of supremacy amidst the others practicing same or similar faiths. And we have seen this happen throughout history. Influence of community. Being part of a religious community or witnessing the positive impact of faith can strengthen a person's conviction, leading them to share their experiences with others. Urgency of time. Well, when one believes in the imminence of the end of times and the need for salvation can create a sense of urgency to share their faith and help others prepare. In essence, the urge to preach religiously often arises from a combination of personal conviction, a desire to help others, and a sense of urgency that arises from facing life's challenges or believing in the importance of spiritual matters. Now, why do people feel the need to preach at you when you tell them you don't believe? Let me explain it this way. This might consider you as a sinful unbeliever. They are trying to save you from eternal damnation, remember? And they cannot understand why the hell you are not grateful for their gracious help. I'm sure you have seen some. All attempts to give them space to practice their beliefs while respecting yours seem to add fuel to the fire. A few years ago, writes another author, I used to get preached at a lot by Jehovah's Witnesses and a bunch of other Christian denominations. After politely telling these people I do not buy into their beliefs and I will love to be left alone, yielded no results. I picked my favorite book series by Terry Pratchett and decided I believe every word in it. Then, whenever these religious people seeking to convert me came around, I would offer them seeds and preach at them. I would tell them the universe was just a round ball sitting on a shelf in the office. Oh, and Terry Pratchett was God. And that when we leave our planet at a future time, we will only take believers in the world on the spaceship of salvation and leave everyone else behind to suffer miserable death and radiation poisoning when the earth becomes inhabitable. I thank them to renounce their God and believe in Him, and follow my made-up religion, as it was the only way to get saved and avoid eternal death. After a few weeks of not letting them get a word edgewise into the discussion or preaching, they started avoiding me. The preaching and trying to convert me stopped. I guess a bit of it was too much for them, and people rarely preached at me anymore. You see, giving people a taste of their own medicine can work wonders and give you the space you need. Question: is it wrong of me to think of people being silly for believing in God? I would never tell them or offend them in any way, because I respect them and their religion. Where is the urgency? Let me be a little more blunt. We must urgently preach the gospel because of so many questions. Those who don't believe the gospel are going to hell, remember? They will. Why do people suddenly become religious? Are you religious? No? Yes? Awakening occurs when any individual reaches an existential empathy or crisis of some kind, and usually after prolonged reflection. A Dr. Daniel Burston is an associate professor of psychology at the Duquesne University was teaching for many years. He reflects on what religious conversion is and what the motives that prompt people to convert. He says he had pondered these many questions from time to time. He says he was actively researching the life of Erik Erikson, a famous Jewish psychoanalyst who was nearly converted to Lutheranism. And he continues that what he has discovered was not a meditation on Erikson's ideas. It was simply an attempt to distill some of the insights and ideas he had gleaned from reading many first-person conversion narratives. From the standpoint of standfast believers, conversion is usually defined as a process that leads someone to grasp an eternal and immutable truth and conduct their life accordingly. Every religion tends to privilege of its own belief system as true and nearer the truth than others. When believers share their findings about the meaning or nature of conversion, they tend to do so with other believers who constitute their primary audience and reference group. Psychologists need to share their findings, therefore, with other psychologists who may not share their theological frame of reference. Science provides its practitioners with no relevant or plausible criteria by which to care the rival claims of different religions in this regard. So, even if the psychologist is a person of faith when investigating a phenomenon like conversion, the psychologist must place all spiritual and faith traditions on a level field. Otherwise, their methodology will be biased by their colleagues. Keep in mind, a religious awakening often occurs when an individual reaches an existential impact or crisis of some kind, and usually after prolonged reflection. As we said before, suddenly feels transported out of their normal, everyday way of being in the world, even elevated, as it were, to a different plane of consciousness. For those inclined toward pantheism or an imminent conception of the day, the transformation they experience and describe entails a high sense of the sacred that suffuses the entire world. God in nature, everywhere, in everyone. For those who concept of the data is more transcendent, it usually entails a personal addressed by God that is utterly compelling. In either way, however, a person who has had a religious awakening of this kind feels liberated, though the ecstasy of the moment may wear off in time. A religious awakening like this is usually a transformative and life-changing experience. Just consider. A kind of religious awakening, common in narcissism, is in some sense of opposite of the pantheism used to variety, instead of experiencing God in nature, everywhere, and in everyone. The person has what I call a negative epiphany, in which the experience of God's absence, rather than his presence, the person with a sudden and sometimes shattering intensity experiences, whereas the first two types of religious experience tend to evoke feelings of and reverence, and negative epiphany, illicit feelings of revulsion and dread. Negative epiphanies, other than the first two varieties, and a fuller exploration of their roots and ramifications is beyond the scope of this essay. But with all that said, it is also important to note that not all religious awakenings of any kind lead to conversions. In some instances, the person who has had an experience of this positive kind may embrace the religion that they or their parents abandoned in their childhood with renewed commitment and farewell. Alternatively, they may feel called upon to create a new religion, or they may become religious reformers who are critical of the reigning religious establishment. for one reason or another. The least common outcome of religious awakening, one which may be a purely 20th century European variant, is a strange kind of religious stalemate, in which the person feels a strong temptation to convert to a new faith, yet deliberately refrain from doing so, though they are the least common of all. Perhaps cases like these are among the most interesting and least understood. Just as a religious awakening can lead the person down into several different paths, the motives that prompt people to convert or embrace a new religious identity are extremely diverse. They may not even be religious. One example, which is rare nowadays, but was commonplace in medieval Christian and the Muslim Ummah, are forced conversions, where the convert is faced with a choice of embracing the religion of his or her captors or overlords, or embracing martyrdom, should they refuse. Another common motive for conversion is a desire to marry someone of another faith. If an interfaith marriage is out of the question, one party may seek admittance into their beloved's religious community. It is difficult to generalize about cases like these. Sometimes they are motivated by love, pure and simple. That's it. Another motive for conversion, which is still fairly common in East Asia, is prevalent among those in India who embrace Buddhism, Islam, or Christianity because these religions do not regard them and their families and their ancestors as subhuman or untouchable. They believe that their present social status is not the result of bad karma or some hereditary degeneracy. Conversions like these are seldom prompted by a religious awakening. Now, alternative for conversion that was commonplace in late 18th and even 19th century Europe and America concerns people whose choice of a new religious affiliation or identity was facilitated precisely by their lack of faith and their spontaneous desire to gain acceptance into the cultural mainstream. Nevertheless, even in the absence of a compelling or transformative religious awakening, many converts in this category are accurately disappointed in the religious communities they were born into, which have failed to meet their spiritual needs in one way or another. They may have undergone a religious education that was too hard or utterly uninspiring. In short, rightly or wrongly, they see their newfound faith and the people who share it as more rational or as less irrational, hypothetical or hypocritical, or intolerant than the faith they abandoned. People like these are in search of the theological perspective that gives them a feeling of cosmological coherence in a moral universe that makes sense. Another more troubling motive for conversion is hatred, or even self-hatred. Obviously, converts who opt for a faith that makes more sense by harboring ambivalent feelings to talk to the faithful of the denomination they were born into, but they seldom verify or condemn it outright. Cases like these are comparatively rare nowadays. There is also a certain type of convert whose main motive for converting is prompted by deep disappointment and or disgusted with his or her previous religious community. He or she is less motivated, considering perhaps why desiring to live, to improve their mental health, or to thrive in cultural mainstream. The hidden injuries of childhood and adolescence often play a very large role in their motivation. Alternatively, there are also instances where the convert's newfound faith apparently gives them license to unleash hateful side of their natures, and a wide range of potential targets: Muslims, Jews, Catholics, Masons, blacks, whites, sexual and gender minorities, communists, humanists, Jehovah's Witnesses, and so forth. Though they may masquerade as a genuine piety and religious fervor, a conversion may be rooted in hatred of self. Hatred is always morbid. There is another category of converts whose motives for conversion are primarily unconscious. They may have a hidden agenda, one that is hidden from themselves as well as from others. These can be found among all of types already listed before. For example, a man whose life is threatened by persuades himself that he believes Jesus is a Messiah, or Muhammad, the last of the prophets, when the danger has vanished or subsided. Why? Because his life was at stake, and in order to convince his persecutors of his sincerity, he had to persuade himself first. Most people who convert have mixed motives. That is, they are motivated by more than a desire or consideration, some of which seldom admit to themselves, for a variety of reasons. To summarize the preceding, a religious awakening need not necessarily be the result in conversion, nor must the public embrace of a new faith be preceded by the kind of ecstatic religious experience celebrated in conversion narratives. On the contrary, cases like these, but not uncommon, not the norm, despite the moving testimonials of many converts. Unfortunately, like the data, to a certain point often is as different phenomena. Religious awakenings, on the other hand, and the actual conversions are correlated in any given period of history, including our own. We know that many people who do convert do so for a variety of reasons. This does not mean that their motives, whether conscious or unconscious, unnecessarily trivial or reprehensible, unless they are rooted in hatred or self-hatred, probably even masquerading them as priority. Finally, in the light of the proceedings, we are now in a position to address the questions. Is conversion good for people's mental health? That depends on the individual and the kind of spiritual counsel and support they encounter along the way. What if everything is nothing but simulation? That's a good question. But according to the encyclopedia, there is a hypothesis in regard to simulation which proposes that one experiences as the real world is actually a simulated reality, as with computer simulations in which humans become the constructs. In 2003, philosopher Nick Bostrom proposed the simulation argument, suggesting that if a civil realization became capable of creating conscious simulations, it could generate so many simulated beings that our randomly chosen conscious entity would almost certainly be in a simulation. Could it be that some advanced civilizations could do these simulations, which would far exceeding the base reality, and we would therefore almost certainly be living in one, as we have made mention of it in one of our last discussions? Meaning that consciousness is not necessarily uniquely retired to biological brains, but can rise from any system that implement the right computational structures and the processes accordingly. The hypothesis is preceded by many earlier versions, and some of them have been featured in science fiction. However, in physics, the view of the universe, for example, and its workings as an ebb and flow of information was first observed by Wheeler. Consequently, two views of the world emerged. The first one proposed that the universe is a quantum computer, while the other proposes that the system performing this simulation is distinct from its simulation, which is the universe. quantum computing specialist Dave Bacon wrote, "In many respects, to this point of view may be nothing more than a result of the fact that the notion of computation is the disease of our age. Everywhere we look today, we see examples of computers, computation, and information theory, and thus we extrapolate this to our laws of physics. Indeed, thinking about computing as arising from faulty components, it seems as if the obstruction that uses perfectly operating computers is unlikely to exist as anything but a Platonic ideal." Another critique of such a point of view is that there is no evidence for the kind of digitization that characterizes computers, nor are there any predictions made by those who advocate such a view that have been experimentally confirmed. A message to test one type of simulation hypothesis was proposed in 2012 in a joint paper by a number of physicists under the assumption of finite computational resources. The simulation of the universe would be performed by dividing the space continuum into a discrete set of points, which may result in observable effects. In analogy with the mini-simulations that lattice gauge theorists run today to underlying theory of strong interactions known as quantum dynamics, several observational consequences of a grid like space-time have been studied in their work. Now, astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson said in 2018 NBC News interview that he estimated the likelihood of the simulation hypotheses being correct at better than 50-50 odds, adding, "I wish I could summon a strong argument against it, but I can find none." However, in a subsequent interview with Chuck Nice on a YouTube episode of Star Talk, Tyson shared that his friend Richard Gott, a professor of astrophysical sciences at Princeton University, made him aware of a strong objection to simulation hypotheses. The objection claims that the comment trait that all hypothetical high-fidelity simulated universes possess is the ability to produce high-fidelity simulated universes, and since our current world does not possess this ability, it would mean that either humans are in the real universe and therefore simulated universes have not yet been created, or that humans are the last in a very long chain of simulated universe, and observation that makes the simulation hypotheses seem less probable. Regarding this objection, Tyson remarked that changes my life. A dream argument. A dream could be considered a type of simulation capable of fooling someone who is asleep. As a result, Russell has argued that the dream hypothesis is not a logical impossibility, but that common sense as well as considerations of simplicity and influence to the best explanation role against it. One of the first philosophers to question a distinction between reality and dreams was Zhuangzi, a Chinese philosopher of the 4th century BC. He raised a problem as well as known butterfly dream, which went as follows. Once Zhuangzi dreamt he was a butterfly flirting and fluttering around, happy with himself and doing as he pleased. He didn't know he was Zhuangzi. Suddenly he woke up, and then he was solid and unstable, but he didn't know if he was Zhuangzi who had dreamt he was a butterfly, or a butterfly dreaming he was Zhuangzi. Between him and a butterfly there must be some distinction. This is called the transformation of things. The philosophical underpinnings of this argument are also brought up by one who was one of the first Western philosophers to do so. In Meditations on First Philosophy, he states, "There are no certain indications by which we may clearly distinguish wakefulness from sleep," and goes on to conclude that it was possible that I am dreaming right now and that all my perceptions are false. Chalmers 2003 discusses the dream hypothesis and notes that this comes into two distinct forms. That he is currently dreaming, in which case many of his beliefs about the world are incorrect. That he was always been dreaming, in which case the object he perceives actually exists, albeit in his imagination. Both the dream argument and the simulation hypothesis can be regarded as skeptical hypotheses, another state of mind in which some argue and individual perceptions have no physical basis in the real world in psychosis, though psychosis may have a physical basis in the real world and explanations vary. In Uncertainty, the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein has argued that such skeptical hypotheses are unsinnig, meaning unsensical in German, as the doubt knowledge that is required to make sense of hypotheses themselves. The dream, how politics is also used to develop other physiological concepts such as Wahlberg's personal horizon, what this world would be internal to it, as we're all a dream. Lucid dreaming is characterized as an idea where the elements of dreaming and waking are combined to a point where the user knows they are dreaming or waking, perhaps. There you have it. This way, this session, therefore, the episode ends. We will meet you again next time in here. Until then, keep smiling and be happy. Thank you.